Hello there, welcome to Creative Technology Tutorials. My name is George and I'll be showing you how to animate a bouncing ball using the layering method that I have learned over the past few years animating myself. I'd like to start this off by, if you're really interested in getting into animation and serious about it, then definitely purchase the Animated Survival Kit. The link is in the description of where to purchase this. And I will be using this ball rig that I have obtained from Creative Crash. Again, the link is in the description if you wish to obtain this rig. First of all, I'd like to go through the settings and preferences before starting any shot. You go to Settings, Preferences, Preferences, and then go to your settings. Usually, depending on what type of animation you're doing, whether you're working with film, like usually for games it's 30 FPS usually in some cases, but for film it's 24 frames per second, and obviously depending on the studio or the company you're working for, they might ask for a different frame rate, maybe 25 or higher. But for this we'll just be working on 24 frames per second, and I'll be going to my animation. And because this is a bouncing ball assignment and it's not necessarily something that is really hard to do, it is something you need to do a lot of to understand the principle of it, mainly squash and stretch, arcs. Depending on whether the actual ball has character, there'll be anticipation or overlap and follow through, whether there's more balls attached, with like a ball with tail. But in this case we won't be doing anything in terms of blocking, we will just literally leave things on auto, basically in an auto spline mode. And I'll go to the time slider now, make sure it's playing at 24 frames per second on the playback speed. And then once I'm done, maybe I'll go back, depending on what you're doing and what project you're using, maybe not for this, but for other projects I would recommend that you put your undo on infinite rather than finite. And save once you're done. And now, with the ball animation, you necessarily, because I'll be going over a layering method, necessarily you want to start with a high point, and you want to generally work within whole numbers if you can. So generally the translate Z is something that we'll be working on later within the animation, but for now we'll be working on the translate Y, which is the up and down. And so I'll round this number off to about, I'll round it off to 8. So now that I have my first key that I want, I'm gonna press S to set the key down. Once I've set my key, you notice how it literally keys every single thing. We don't want to do that. So go back, right click, delete that key, and because we're only working with translate Y right now, we want to right click the translate Y and select key selected. Now, going off of my head on the timing of how the bouncing ball would work, there's not necessarily a certain time, but I'm generally going to rough it out from my own mind onto this. So literally my way isn't the only way, and my timing isn't the only timing. There's all different ways you can look at reference of how bouncing balls move. They all move differently depending on the type of material, weight, atmosphere and environment. So I've set my first key there at frame 1, and let's go to frame 10, and we'll put at frame 10 we'll have this down as our contact frame. And I'm going to right click translate Y and key selected. So now, as you can see, I have a normal motion going down. Now generally the way I got taught, and looking at the Animated Survival Kit, there tends to be like a rule of half in a sense, where as obviously something is dropping, whether it's a bouncing ball or something with energy, it will slowly lose it. It will slowly lose that energy in that sense. So obviously the next bounce after this frame 10 isn't necessarily going to be the same height as frame 1. So what we'll do, and it's necessarily not going to be exactly the same time either, it's not going to take exactly 10 frames to go back up to the same frame we have here on frame 20. If anything, it will get less and less and less depending on the ball itself, but I'm going for a typical bouncing ball, like rubbery effect. So I'll probably put this at frame. I'll probably put them all rounded off to the 17 mark. And looking at that, we know that this translate Y is at 8. This is at 0. And so this, so we can move down in 2s, so we can put this at 6. Right click that, key selected. And now obviously going down is a lot quicker than going up. So we'll add less frames than 7 frames from here since this is going up motion, so we'll have maybe within the next 5 frames or 6 maybe, have that back on 0. Then right click that, key selected. And now so far we have 2 bounces, but they generally feel okay in terms of translate Y. It feels like it's kind of hitting a wall at the moment, but we'll work more with the timing as we've laid down our key poses of what we're doing. So now going through this by eye, I want to make sure that this is at frame 4, since we were going down in 2s, since it was 8, then 6, and then we want the 4. And remember, if you don't have auto key selected, then chances are that it won't set the key and you'll have to do it manually and right click and key select. Okay, let's bring that down to 5 frames. 0, key select, oops, key select that. You can generally get the idea of what's happening. Okay, so this one's going to be at 2 now. Right click, key select. It doesn't necessarily have to be working towards the numbers. This just makes sure it's a cleaner motion and easier to understand. You're not really working with decimals and everything like that and getting too confused. So working with whole numbers is generally better, and it's probably a rule of thumb to have when working professionally as well, especially when you need to animate a shot and someone needs to go into that shot and maybe fix a few things or look at it or understand exactly what values are at what certain control. And obviously if things are getting too overwhelming while animating, then the shot isn't going to get done, or even if it does get done, it wouldn't be done really well. So now going from 39, I want to take it another 4 frames. 0, key selected, and then looking back at this, okay, so now this is going to be going back up. We could probably have it another 4 frames, going to 1. I know we said we were going up in 2s, but well, then if anything we can just do it at 0.5. Maybe let's just do 1. Key selected, and then on the last, leave that at 0. We might add a residual bounce, so like a little bounce in between this. So key selected, go to 3 frames, literally add the tiniest little bit, this is something you can kind of do by eye. You wouldn't have to do it numerically. Key selected. Go back down. Probably 2, maybe another third frame. Let's say 2. Right, click. Key selected. Okay, so now if I go into this, this is literally what we have so far. Doesn't look too bad. Obviously it's nowhere near done, but we've generally got that up and down motion going now. And as you can see, the keys are getting slowly together, moving along, to show that the frame rate is getting shorter, so the movements are getting quicker as it's coming to a stop.